His Promised Land, Chapter 5. It didn't take me long to find out that I had landed in a canebrake which was impenetrable. I was too exhausted to do anything but go into the cane, lie down, and forget my troubles in a deep sleep. The sun was high when I woke up. Last night was a terrible nightmare, but my wet clothes were ample evidence of its realities. With the river on one side and the impenetrable canebrake on the other, I had no alternative but to follow the worn river bench either up or downstream. For some unknown reason, I decided to go downstream. After walking for some time, I came to a road leading back into the country, which was a relief from the uncertain sand of the river shore. I was in a country where the slaves had their freedom to go and come in daylight, so I boldly struck down the road, depending upon my own resourcefulness. I ran into a party of slaves without warning. Asking for a drink of water, I was directed to the house just ahead. With this information, I waited until they had disappeared, then took the woods skirting the fields of the house, which was in plain sight, coming back to the road beyond. Everything went well with me until the middle of the afternoon. I came to a blacksmith's shop at a crossroad. After carefully scouting, finding the smith was a colored man, I decided to go boldly to him, asking for both water and food. I could see he knew who I was, as he directed me to the water bucket at the other end of the shop. I had hardly finished drinking when a white man rode up to the other side of the shop and asked of the smith if he had seen a runaway. If I had used my head, I would have known he was looking for someone else besides me. Instead, I started on a dead run out of the shop. My suspicious action brought the man at my heel. Knowing he was mounted, I made for a fence and made across the fields toward a group of slaves at work. As I came close to the field hands, I saw a young woman who I instinctively knew would protect me. She saw the man on horseback chasing me, so I needed no introduction. Grabbing a large basket used for holding cotton, she motioned me to climb into it. She then threw several gunny bags over me. My pursuer evidently knew of my hiding place, for he came directly to the young woman, asked her if she had seen me. He was very crafty in his method of approach, for before I knew what was going on, he had upset the basket, and I was thrown sprawling to the ground. My judgment of the woman was correct, for before the man could seize me, the woman was on him like a wild beast. The last I saw of her, she was fighting, scratching, holding her man, like I was one of her own children. I have often wondered what happened to her, for she certainly was in for a severe whipping. Once away from the fields across which I ran like a scared rabbit, I hid in my friend the forest until night. Now I had to watch my steps closely, for a slave abroad at night was always examined closely. Whither I was going I did not know, but wherever it was, I determined not to stand still in that country on the lookout for a fugitive slave. Gaining the road, I walked until I came to a large town, which proved to be Vicksburg. Once in the streets, as it was still early, I was safe. Making for the river, I found a steamer taking on cotton. The flaring fireboxes were my enemies, but the water was deep, so the stern of the boat was snug against the bank. I had no trouble leaping aboard in the dark. I ran into the colored deckhand, who hid me on top of bales of cotton. When he told me the steamer was bound for New Orleans, for once I thought my lucky star had failed me. I made up my mind any place was preferable to Vicksburg just now, and I stowed away hoping for the best. The steamer had hardly gotten under way when the Negro who had hid me brought a white mate to my hiding place, the only time I was ever betrayed by one of my own color. Knowing I could not escape, I climbed down at the first command of the mate, quietly giving myself up. This time, I was shackled to the lower deck where I was in plain view. I made no effort to escape. In sheer despair, I resigned myself to my fate. At New Orleans, I was taken to jail and locked up in a cell. Every effort was made to learn from me where I came from in the name of my master. Having made up my mind it was better for me to face the unknown than go back to Mobile and face the known, I stubbornly refused to give any information about myself. I noticed immediately that this attitude rather pleased the officials, why I was able to discover later. From the very first, I made myself agreeable and ingratiated myself with my jailer. The police soon let me out of my cell, so I had the run of the jail. I had made up my mind there was no use of breaking jail like a ragamuffin. I had to be well dressed to walk the streets of New Orleans. I could have escaped at any time I pleased. For 10 months I educated myself how to outwit men in combinations. During this period I worked out a method which gave me a great advantage in meeting situations that arose in the future. Mind you, I was dealing with ignorant men. I soon saw that they were slow thinkers, that they did absolutely nothing more than they were compelled to do, that they were always putting themselves on the blind side of any movement. Being of an active mind, I occupied myself by working out imaginary plans of escape. For the 10 months I was in jail, I worked out these problems until formulating certain theories which were of great use to me later on. For instance, I soon demonstrated that a man with a plan always had the advantage of an unsuspecting person. Second, timing of execution was even more important than a plan. There were certain positions which were blind spots to my captors. If I occupied one of these blind spots, if I timed my next movements correctly, I could do anything up to murder without my victim knowing of my presence. It became a sort of a play with me, which I enjoyed because I made the white man helpless against me. Another advantage over my white adversaries was that I knew I was an animal worth $2,000. I knew that there was some game on that would give someone besides my owner $2,000. In order to cash in, I had to be dressed up and sold on the auction block. I was merely waiting patiently for that time to come. In the meantime, I read all the newspapers I could get by using the simple ruse of tearing them in 2 pieces, throwing them around until I could be alone, when I would put them back together again. In this way, I learned the auction days, how many slaves were sold, and where they came from. I found the greater number came down the river from Kentucky and Missouri, that the steamers arrived early in the morning. With this information, I was ready. But as I have said, it was 10 months before the cashing in move was made. One morning, I was taken from jail downtown, completely fitted out in new wearing apparel, from a new hat to new shoes. Everything was of the best, so I knew I was to be sold as a houseboy. If I do say it myself, I was very much better dressed and more intelligent looking than the white men, which pleased my vanity and modified my anger against my inveterate and hated enemies. From the clothing store, I was taken to the slave pen for inspection and sale. I made up my mind I was going to select my owner, so when anyone came to inspect me I did not like, I answered all questions with a yes and made myself disagreeable. So far as I was concerned, the game was on, and I began to play it. Having the freedom of the place, I set out to get my data for a plan of escape. I soon saw that there was a large gate through which the caravan of slaves entered into the pen. This gate was heavy and was opened inward by an old man very slowly. In the process of opening, he had his back to the entrance. I recognized the blind spot of my plan. My next move was the timing of my plan. I soon discovered that if I stood at a certain spot, I could not be seen by anyone in the pen. That was my timing spot. Boldly played, I knew I could beat the existing combination, particularly with my new suit of clothes. I knew the next day was auction day, and I would be put on the block. Knowing that the slaves from upriver would enter that gate that morning, I was ready and waiting to execute my plan. At the appointed time, the old man opened the gate with his back to me. In an instant, I stepped off my blind spot, making for the gate as the slaves came through, thereby intervening their bodies between me and the gateman. It was so easy, it seemed impossible. But then I was outside of the pen on a wide open street. Instead of walking briskly away, I was shrewd enough to stand idly by and watch the cavalcade go through. Then, timing myself, I moved very slowly, keeping close to the fence, which increased the blind spot of the gateman, so that when he did see me, I was so far away, if he saw me at all, he was convinced I could not have gotten through the entrance and be that distance away. I was free once more and on my own. That Mississippi River attracted me like a magnet, for as soon as I was free to move in my own selected direction, I made straight for the river. My good clothes was my open sesame, for I was not even noticed as I strolled by steamer after steamer. Coming to barrels of flour, up on end, I carelessly sat on top of one to think over my plans for the future. Happening to look up, I saw the steamer was a mobile packet. I liked to fell off the barrel, but haste made me on my own undoing, so I deliberately sat still, looking quietly across the river. A hand touched my shoulder. Looking up, I stared right into the eyes of my owner, the doctor from Mobile. All he said was, "Well, well," and I climbed off the barrel, completely overcome by the suddenness of my discovery. That night, I went back to Mobile with the old doctor, who was kindness itself. It was by the rarest accident he stumbled onto me, and he had given up ever seeing me again. After months of absence and adventure, I found myself back in Mobile at my starting point. However skeptical one may be of my story up to date, the facts and episodes happened quite in the way I have narrated them. If the records of Mobile are exact, they will verify my existence and what followed.